Good morning and welcome to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Feet, Forks, and the Fate of Our Families. If you have a question about anything being discussed today, please call or email during our broadcast. The phone number and email address are on your screen now and will appear again later in the program. Also, the handout, sign-in sheet, and evaluation are all available online. You will need to register for this program in order to access those materials. Continuing education credits have been approved for nurses and social workers for today's program. In order to receive credit for this training, you must watch the entire program, then complete and return the sign-in sheet and evaluation. While content may continue to be relevant, CE credit will only be awarded for 1 year for nurses, expiring on April the 30th of 2016. And 2 years for social workers, expiring on April 30th of 2017. I'm Molly Kilman. I'm the Director of the Nutrition and Physical Activity Division with the Alabama Department of Public Health. And I'm very honored today to welcome our presenter, Dr. David Katz, the Director of Prevention Research Center at Yale University's School of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Katz.
Thanks very much, Molly. Good to be with you in the room. Good to be with you out there. And the mission today is to make the case that feet and forks have a profound influence on the fate of our families. And in order to make that case, I'll begin by suggesting it's really time to see the elephant in the room. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand, and felt about the knee, "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain," quoth he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So oft in theologic wars the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about the elephant not one of them has seen. Now, my friends, I fear we're prone to much the same tendency in epidemiology. And the case I'd like to make is that a truly luminous prize has been tantalizingly within reach of us all for literal decades, but we will never grasp it until we see past the disassembled parts to the whole elephant in the room. Or worded differently, we will never escape the dark wood of modern epidemiology until we see the forest through the trees. So let's talk about that journey, getting out of that dark wood. We began, of course, with the elephant in the room. I want to talk about the peril we face, the promise of it all, and the problem, and the other problem that have forestalled our progress. We will come to a fork in the road, and maybe you know what Yogi Berra says about that. We'll have to take it. We'll see if we can get traction with the right metaphor. I will make the case for sandbagging as a career choice. I'll suggest that while we do need to change the world when it comes to our health and the health of people we care for and about, we can't just keep on waiting on the world to change, to borrow from John Mayer. We will have recourse to a big spoon. We will come back to a fork in the road, and ideally before we're done, we will see the forest through the trees and get out of the dark wood. But it is in the dark wood where this tale begins, the dark wood of modern epidemiology. And the case could be made that what makes this wood dark is the huge burden of chronic diseases. For many years, when we have cited the causes of death on death certificates, the things that inevitably show up there are things like heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes. These are chronic diseases that often result in premature death. And working as physicians in training in hospitals in the middle of the night, we're the ones who fill out those death certificates. And when someone dies after complications of a myocardial infarction, we list as the cause of death heart disease. It's logical. But it isn't very enlightening. When someone dies of a myocardial infarction or its complications, to say that the cause of that was heart disease isn't telling us anything we don't already know. Well, McGinnis and Figi, two preeminent epidemiologists, decided back in 1990 that there was a better way to talk about the causes of death. They actually offered an observation and an insight that should perhaps have been obvious to all of us all along. Diseases aren't really causes, they suggested. Diseases are effects. And what we really want to know is effects of what? What was causing the diseases that were causing premature deaths every year in our country? What was causing the diseases which, because they were chronic diseases, were taking not only years from lives, but life from years as well? So they got their arms around the relevant epidemiologic data, crunched the relevant numbers, and in 1993 published a seminal paper entitled Actual Causes of Death in the United States. And what the paper went on to describe was the root causes of virtually all of the premature deaths, some 2 million of them, that occur every year in the United States. And they were basically able to demonstrate that all of the premature deaths every year in our country, but for a rounding error, were attributable to a list of 10 factors which we could modify. Many of the factors on that list of McGinnis and Figi's we can modify as individuals. Some of them we can only modify by working together. Sometimes the best defense of the human body resides with the body politic. But either individually or collectively, everything on McGinnis and Figi's list accounting for premature death could be changed if we so chose. And for our purposes today, as interesting as the full list of 10 is, and I commend it to you, we actually only need to focus on the first 3 things. Because back in 1993 when this paper was published, 80% of the action was just the first 3 things on this list of 10. 80% of the premature deaths that occur in our country every year were attributable to tobacco, bad diets, and lack of physical activity. 80%. The entire remainder of the list accounted only for the residual 20%. That's a pretty provocative story, that by changing our exposure to tobacco, our diets, and our physical activity, we could potentially eliminate 80% of the premature deaths in our country. The only problem with this story is that 1993 is getting to be a rather old vintage, right? And I presume you like your data fresher. Well, no problem. We have fresher data. 10 years later, Ali Maghdad and others at the CDC reanalyzed this same issue and reached almost the identical conclusion. Really, all that had changed in the span of a decade is that the gap between tobacco as the #1 cause of premature death, and for that matter chronic disease, and the combination of bad use of feet and forks as #2 had narrowed. It had narrowed for one good reason, the strides we've made in our society against tobacco use, and amen to that, but it narrowed for one bad reason as well. Deteriorating use of our feet, degenerating use of our forks, worsening epidemics of obesity and diabetes to show for it. This, then, was the dark wood of modern epidemiology back in 2000. That, too, is getting to be an old vintage. I presume you like your data fresher than that. All right, then, let's jump ahead to 2009. Earl Ford and colleagues, again at the CDC, published results of survey research conducted among 23,000 people living in and around Potsdam, Germany. What Dr. Ford and colleagues did was ask these 23,000 people about 4 factors affecting their health. They asked them, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? And we're going to have to pause here. So a brief digression. They asked them, do you eat well? Yes or no. This was fairly simplistic survey research. So they used as a marker for eating well habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. That's it. They didn't do elaborate measurements of dietary quality. They didn't get into the details of exactly what the proportion of different fatty acids was. Just, do you usually eat vegetables, fruits, and whole grains? And here's the thing. That was enough. I'm going to make the case in a minute that it was enough, but I am going to return to this before we're done. So this is the lumosity part of today's program. I'm going to come back to this, and I'm going to ask two questions. I'm going to ask who, and I'm going to ask what. And those of you in the room can answer. Those of you out there at the other side of the TV lens can be thinking about this for yourselves. But I'm going to show you a picture of a house on fire. And I'm going to say, remember that memory test? Now is the time. So who, and the answer will be Dr. Earl Ford. And what, and the answer will be vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. Okay? Everybody good with that? Moving on then, back to our regularly scheduled program. So they asked, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? Habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. Are you physically active on a regular basis, yes or no? And is your weight about where it ought to be, yes or no? And I have to digress again, because one of these things is not like the others. Arguably, one of these things just doesn't belong. See, usually when we talk about the factors influencing health, we're talking about behaviors. Smoking, a behavior. You choose to do it, you choose not to do it. Diet, you choose what to eat. Physical activity, you get off the couch or you don't. But did anybody decide what to weigh today? Anybody wake up and decide, I'm going to weigh this today? I mean, would that it were so, right? Weight is not a behavior. Weight is not a choice. Weight is an outcome. And largely, it's an outcome of two factors already on Dr. Ford's list: diet and physical activity, calories in and calories out. But it's not exclusively a product of those two forces. Two people can eat the same, exercise the same, one gets fat and one stays thin. It's true. We know it's true. And, by the way, it's not fair, but whoever said life would be fair, unpleasant stuff can happen to thin people too. That's not necessarily fair either. It's true, and it's true because of variation in genetic polymorphisms. It's true because of variation in ethnic heritage. We're discovering more and more it may be partly true because of variations in the microbiome. But it's absolutely true. Weight is not a behavior, and it's not a choice. And that has implications for all of us in what we do. We have to be very careful not to think in terms of incentivizing a healthy weight, because that would penalize people who are exercising and eating well but not losing weight just because they're constitutionally prone to be heavy, right? We want to incentivize the things, or disincentivize the things people actually control, but not outcomes they don't. And now, back to our regularly scheduled program and Dr. Ford's study. So, at the end of all that, they asked about these four things. Do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? Are you active, yes or no? Is your weight fine, yes or no? And what they went on to do was to compare the two ends of the spectrum. So they compared, I don't smoke, I eat well, I'm active, my weight is fine, to I smoke, eat badly, don't exercise, and my weight is out of control. These people, over the span of their lifetimes, this was a retrospective cohort study, had an 80% lesser rate of all major chronic disease than these people. Flip the switch from bad to good on any one of these factors, and the lifetime probability of any major chronic disease goes down about 50%. But fire on all four cylinders, and the lifetime probability of all major chronic disease aggregated, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, etc., the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, decline a stunning 80%. Now ask yourselves, if the news were to break tomorrow on whatever screen you like best to read, that there's a new drug available. FDA approved. It's available in bountiful supply. It's stunningly free of side effects, shockingly inexpensive, safe enough for children and octogenarians alike, and taken once daily for the rest of your life. This pill will slash your risk of ever getting any major chronic disease by 80%. What would everybody do first? Call a doctor to get a prescription, or call a broker to buy stock in the company that owns the patent on this stuff? Frankly, both would be excellent ideas, but for the fact that there is no such pill. And in my opinion, there never will be any such pill. But lifestyle is exactly that medicine. And we've known about it since 1993, at least. Anyway, if you happen not to like Potsdam for some reason, or you prefer your data even fresher, we have a reaffirmation of these exact findings by Kavavic et al. In a cohort study in Europe just a few years back. More recently still, in yet another cohort study here in the U.S. by McCullough et al. And if that's not fresh enough, fresher data still, just a few months back, we have a study showing these same lifestyle factors prevent 4 out of 5 heart attacks in high-risk men. 4 out of 5. Anybody want to do that math? 80%. That same figure keeps showing up like a repetitive drumbeat in the peer-reviewed literature, and it hasn't stopped. You want fresher? We've got fresher. Same lifestyle factors associated with a reduction in colorectal cancer. And let's not leave women out of the mix. This is very recent, beginning of this year. Those same lifestyle factors associated with the same 80% reduction in the rate of MI, or heart attack, in high-risk women as well as men. The beat goes on and on and on, and the repercussions of this drumbeat in the peer-reviewed literature, they go to the very pith and marrow of us. They actually reverberate within the double helix of DNA. For a long time, we talked about the nature-nurture debate, as if it were important to ask the question, where does the greater power center reside? In the genetic hand we're dealt, or in how we play that hand? But we actually sailed right through the genomic age and quickly entered into the epigenetic age. And what we now know is that the nature-nurture debate serves up a false choice, a false dichotomy, and something of an unfortunate distraction. Because the reality is, we can nurture nature. A study on the slide by my friend Dean Ornish enrolled 30 men with early-stage prostate cancer. And as many of you know, in its early stages, prostate cancer may not require immediate treatment. You're not sure if it's going to progress, so you can do what's called watchful waiting. But Dr. Ornish and colleagues thought, well, we can do better than just watch and wait. While we're watching and waiting, let's give these men the benefit of lifestyle as medicine. So they went on to do exactly that. So these men got an optimal, mostly plant-based diet, routine physical activity, obviously no tobacco, and in addition, plenty of sleep, the dissipation of stress, and strong social interactions. And by the way, that's the 6-cylinder engine. Feet, forks, and fingers, sleep, stress, and love. Get those 6 things right. After that, everything is vanishingly less important. So they got those 6 things right, and over a span of months, went on to study not so much the men, and not so much the cancer in the men, but preferentially the genes in the men with the cancer. And what they reported was that this lifestyle intervention took 500 cancer promoter genes and turned them off, dramatically downregulated their expression, 50 cancer suppressor genes and dramatically upregulated their expression. The power of lifestyle as medicine, the power of feet, forks, and fingers, is such that it can change our fate, our medical destinies, at the very level of our DNA. We can, in fact, nurture, even nature. And this is not one study. This is a branch of the literature that's filling out very fast. And it's pretty exciting stuff. So I think the case can be made, and indeed dare hope that the case has just been made, that the master levers of medical destiny are not the tools of the medical trade. Nothing I and colleagues were taught to carry through the corridors of hospitals. Nothing at the cutting edge of biomedical advance. Not PET or SPECT or functional MRI, not robotic surgery. The master levers of medical destiny were in our hands all along. They're what we choose to do each day with our feet, our forks, and our fingers. And I trust you know what Archimedes said about a lever. Give me one long enough, and I can move the whole world. Make no mistake, these levers are long enough, and should long since have served to move the whole world of modern epidemiology and public health to a better place. But, alas, we like to say knowledge is power. Would that it were so. The gap between what we know and what we do with what we know belies that wishful thinking. So as we convene today to address these issues, there is a great challenge before us all. It is the challenge of translation, because much has been lost there. It's the challenge of turning what we know, indeed what we have known for 22 years at least, since McGinnis and Feege's paper about how to prevent up to 80% of premature death and chronic disease, into what we routinely do. And the burden of the status quo is such that however arduous those miles of translation may be, we will have to undertake the journey. We cannot tolerate the status quo, the dark wood of modern epidemiology. There are many ways to characterize the shadows in this dark wood, but one good one is to look at the trends in obesity. And as I suspect many involved in this event already know, the CDC uses color-coded maps to show obesity trends. And inevitably, since rates have not gone down since they started doing this, any color change in these maps is bad news. So this is the map from 1985. This is the map from 1995. This is the map from 2010. And hot off the presses, this is 2013. And the question for us all, my friends, is whether we'll get a handle on this problem before or after Crayola runs out of colors for the CDC and their map makers. This is a hell of a mess. And it matters not because we all care what we see when we look in the mirror. I suspect we all do, and frankly, I think that's fine. But the reason obesity is worth talking about in this context for somebody like me who's a public health physician is because obesity is a canary in the coal mine of chronic disease. It's a warning of what is to come. Where there is more obesity, there is more heart disease. There is more cancer. There is more stroke. There is more arthritis. There is more dementia. And most ineluctably, there is more diabetes, because the links between obesity and type 2 diabetes are so strong. So here are the diabetes trends. This is 1994. This is 2010. And they are in lockstep with the trends in obesity. And while we have been in the frying pan for quite some time, signs suggest we are headed toward the fire. Not too long ago, CDC made a projection that should current trends in our culture persist, by or about the middle of this century, 1 in 3 Americans would be diabetic. Now, at last check, there were about 28 million diagnosed diabetics in the U.S. 1 in 3 would be 100 million people. That's an astronomical increase. And think about some of the stuff that's gone on in our culture lately, like the hullabaloo over health care reform, and I won't presume to guess everybody's politics, although we're a public health group, so we may all lean the same way. But the fact is, it doesn't really matter. We can all agree that a lot of the fuss about health care reform had to do with money. If no money were changing hands, people wouldn't get so upset. It's a lot about how money needs to get spent, and frankly, sadly, the whole thing is moot if this happens, because there's no way to pay this bill when 4 or 5 times as many people as now have this costly chronic disease will have it. So this was the trend. Data were gathered 2 years later to indicate, yep, we're on course. We're headed toward that 1 in 3 diabetics. We have evidence to show that the mortality toll of obesity is actually far greater than we previously recognized. Now, why would that be? Well, think about it. Who tends to die? Older people tend to die. People dying today in their 70s or 80s, they did not grow up in a world of epidemic childhood obesity. To whatever extent obesity figures in their pathology, they encountered it relatively late in their life. What if the adverse effects of obesity on both morbidity and mortality have to do with not only the degree of obesity, but the duration? Well, then, the earlier in life you encounter it, the worse it's going to be. Well, that's exactly what Masters and colleagues found. When they looked at successive birth cohorts, in other words, moving from the past toward the present and identifying people who spent a greater proportion of their life exposed to epidemic obesity, the mortality toll went up steeply, which is pretty ominous when we think about kids today being born into a world of epidemic obesity who will have to live with it for their whole lives, unless, of course, we fix this mess. And we have evidence that the rates of diabetes are rising especially briskly in young people. And by the way, it's worth noting, when I went to medical school a little less than 100 years ago, they taught us about 2 kinds of diabetes, juvenile onset and adult onset. And when I look out at any audience and I see faces quite a bit younger than my own, kind of makes me wince to think that you are growing up professionally in a world where adults and kids both get type 2 diabetes, and we're supposed to be okay with that. Type 2 diabetes is a name we made up when children started getting adult onset diabetes. Our collective societal response was to drape a euphemism over that mess. Change the name of the disease, make it okay. But at the time of my medical training, we called it adult onset diabetes. Kids did not get it. They now get it routinely. We call it type 2, and we're supposed to be okay with that. Do not be okay with that. No child should ever get that disease. It's totally preventable. It really is a cultural travesty that we allowed it to come to this. And, by the way, maybe it won't be 1 in 3 Americans who's diabetic. Maybe it'll be 40%, more recent data. We underestimated the risk. And in certain ethnic minorities, maybe it'll be 50%. This is 120 to 150 million diabetics in the U.S. by the middle of the century, should current trends persist. And here's the thing. I only signed up for a health-related mission. You all signed up for a health-related mission. But folks, we find ourselves lined up on the front lines of nothing less than homeland security. Because I submit to you that if we've got 150 million people with a chronic, costly, potentially disabling disease, the United States of America cannot be solvent. The fate of the nation truly does hang in the balance and largely rests with us. So welcome to the Department of Public Health and, oh, by the way, the Department of Homeland Security, because it does reside here. And frankly, that's important. But for me, as a husband, as a father, as a physician, and as a person in public health, I don't routinely measure the costs of all this in dollars. I mean, I think that matters and you have to talk about it, but it's the human cost of all this that matters most to me. And we need to ask ourselves, when we talk about 120, 150 million diabetics in the U.S. in 2050, who will they be? See, it's not you and me. Our day will have come and our day will have gone. We are talking about the blighted future we bequeath to our children and our grandchildren, giving this mess to them. They are the ones among whom 1 in 2 will be diabetic. And frankly, that's unconscionable if we can do something about it. And we can do something about it. And frankly, although I have been a prophet of doom on this topic for about 25 years now, even I did not foresee a 35% increase in the rate of stroke among 5 to 14-year-olds in the U.S., but that's been reported. Even as the rate of stroke among those 50 and older has declined due to better detection and treatment of hypertension. And the only smoking gun on the scene to account for the steep rise in the rate of stroke among 5 to 14-year-olds is epidemic childhood obesity. Can you imagine anything more unconscionable than a stroke in an 11-year-old that a societal commitment to better use of feet and forks would have prevented? This is the dark wood of modern epidemiology. And folks, I apologize because that's a rather lugubrious start to this talk. I realize, I hope you didn't just eat anything or you now have indigestion. But there's good news. See, it's always darkest just before the dawn. So if this is the dark wood, or rather if these are the dark clouds above the wood, what then of the silver lining? Well, I'm pleased to say it's there, and it's every bit as luminous as the clouds in the wood are dark. What if knowledge were power? What if lifestyle were our medicine? Well, then I could say to you, we could eliminate 80% of heart disease in the world today. 80% at least. This is not contentious. Experts routinely agree about this. We could eliminate 90% of all diabetes. Just think about that for a second. So we're talking about going from 28 million diabetics to 150 million, and I'm saying we could eliminate 90% of the 28 million. I mean, that's just a stunning difference. But it's not a controversial assertion. We could eliminate up to about 60% of all cancer. We could have similar benefits across a long list of other conditions, including dementia. I could say this to you, and I could cite peer-reviewed literature to back me up. And in fact, you know what? I am saying this to you, and I am citing peer-reviewed literature to back me up. And what I'd like to know, and there are only a few people here right in front of me, but this small group, I'd like to know if my slide has brought a tear to any eye here. or a lump to any throat? Goosebumps. I did get goosebumps, but otherwise it's a group of tearless, lumpless, insensitive souls. And I suspect the same is true out there, or maybe not. Maybe they're not insensitive. See, these are stunning statistics, among the most stunning in the history of public health, and certifiably true, not even controversial. But at the end of the day, they are still just statistics. They're potentially dull, they're potentially dry, they're potentially bland, and they are certainly anonymous. I've worked in public health most of my adult life, and I've come to recognize that the whole endeavor is encumbered by a potentially crippling fiction. For you see, there is no public. The public is nameless. The public is faceless. The public is impossible to love. There is no public. There's just you and me and everybody else. And we can conduct a little exercise to prove that to ourselves, but I'll need you to participate. Of course, I can't see all the hands out there, but we'll do this just the same. We're all in health. That's what we do. But before we started doing that, we had a different bond that made us alike. We're people. We had a human bond. So let's remember that. Let's just be people, like everybody else. And let's think about the thing that matters most to people, and that's other people. In particular, the people we love. So forget about what you do professionally. Think about your life and the people that matter most. And here's the question. If you or someone you love has been affected by heart disease, raise your hand. And I won't see all the hands, but I'll see a few here in the room. And keep your hand up. And if you or someone you love has been affected by cancer, anyone you love, add your hand to those already up. Everybody here in front of me has their hand up. And we could continue. We could add, raise your hand if someone you love has been affected by stroke. Raise your hand if someone you love has been affected by diabetes. Folks I can see have one or both hands up. I imagine the same is going on out there. I've done this in very large audiences. I'll be your proxy now, so relax. And inevitably, by the time I get through heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, every hand in the room is up. So now conjure to your mind's eye the face of that person who first made you raise your hand, and think about that day when you found out. Maybe it was a phone call. Maybe you were right there. Maybe you rode in the ambulance. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you went to the hospital, the emergency room, the ICU, the CCU. Maybe you just heard about it from frantic relatives over the phone, getting updates all day. Maybe they got better and came home. Maybe they didn't. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Either way, it was a bad day. It was a bad phone call. When we answer the phone, it's the very thing we're hoping not to hear. And every one of us has been through it, most of us more than once. And here's the thing. If knowledge were power, if we stopped at nothing to turn what we have long known into what we routinely do, 8 out of 10 of us would not have had cause to raise our hands. That's what an 80% reduction in all chronic disease feels like. It's not remote. It's not statistically anonymous. It's up close and it's intensely personal. When we part the veil of statistical anonymity, the faces we see looking back at us are the faces of people we know and the faces of people we love. We all, quite literally, have skin in the game. And it is for that reason that the miles of translation, however difficult, must be traversed. And the promise of all this must be kept. We're really talking about nothing less than protecting the people we love and bequeathing to our children and grandchildren a better future and a brighter medical destiny. All of this, I think, then, begs the question. If we have the knowledge, and we've all got skin in the game, and consequently a basis for passion, what's the problem? What possibly could have forestalled our progress all these years? Well, frankly, I think something fairly monumental is in the way. In essence, if you take this, sort of the native condition of Homo sapiens, and you add this, pretty much inevitably you wind up about here. In much the same way as if you took this and added this, you would get this. And I give you my figurative trademark for about 25 years now, the polar bear in the Sahara. Now, I note in passing that when my wife and I first put this slide together, there was no imminent threat that this was actually going to happen to polar bears. Alas, in the past 25 years, that may have changed, but my friends here will have to invite Al Gore to deliver the next talk in the series, and he'll tell you all about that. My point is a different one. Polar bears are marvels of survival, beautifully adapted to one of the Earth's harshest climates, but specifically adapted to that climate. Every creature has a native habitat. The bears are adept at soaking up and retaining what is, in their Arctic home, a scarce commodity, warmth. And doing that keeps them alive in the bitter cold. But if they did exactly the same thing in this very different environment, it would cook their goose. Soak up and retain warmth in the Arctic, it keeps you alive. Soak up and retain warmth under the burning Sahara sun in summer, and it's game over. And my point here, of course, is we are polar bears in the Sahara. Throughout most of human history, calories were relatively scarce and hard to get, and physical activity was unavoidable. It did not require gym membership or specialized footwear. It was called survival, and everybody did it every day. We have devised a modern world where physical activity is scarce and hard to get, and calories are unavoidable. Houston, we have a problem. And Montgomery, where I am now, and wherever you are, and every place else, it's a global problem. I submit to you that as a species, Homo sapiens has no native defenses against caloric excess or the lure of the couch, never having needed them before now. No native defenses, that is, save one. Great big Homo sapien brains. We are, arguably, smarter than the average bear and can potentially think our way out of this mess of our own devising. And that's just what we need to do. What we ought to be thinking about then is how do we get there from here? And frankly, that would be a pretty big problem. But we have another problem we have to talk about, and that is, do we even really know where there is? Because there's no way to get there from here if you don't know where you're going, right? That's the first step, prerequisite. Well, let's take stock here. With regard to fingers, not smoking. I think we know where there is, right? Smoking bad, not smoking much better, right? Nobody's confused about that one. Moving on. Feet, being on our rear ends all day, not so good. Up and moving, much better, right? Nobody's confused. Now, you actually can get into debates with exercise physiologists and fitness instructors about the best way to exercise, but that's splitting hairs, right? Everybody basically agrees, never moving bad, moving good. No real confusion. But what about forks? There's the rub, right? Because we get a new version of how best to eat every damn week. And everybody who comes out with a new fad diet book throws everybody who ever came before under the bus, right? I mean, those guys are morons. Listen to me. And, of course, there's a real problem with that, whether it's true or untrue. If it's untrue, then, of course, it's nonsense and propaganda. But even if it were true, anybody paying attention would have to say, well, gee, if everybody who came along up until yesterday, who seemed like an expert, was actually a moron I shouldn't listen to, then somebody may come along tomorrow to tell me that this new character who says they know it all is also a moron, I shouldn't listen to them, so I'm thinking I shouldn't listen to anybody, because nobody knows what they're talking about. And then you've got everybody just tuning it all out and saying, forget it. I don't know what you guys think you know, but I know you can find me at Burger King when you work it all out, so see you there. Or I'll be at an all-you-can-eat buffet. All right, come tell me when you got it sorted. That's a real problem. So this is the mess we're in, and it brings us to a fork in the road. Along one time, we remain perennially befuddled about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens, and we never get there from here because we can't agree where there is, or we choose a different time. And I'd like to propose that. And I think we know exactly where we ought to be going if we adopt the bird's eye view. And I'd like to think I speak on this topic with some authority. First, I have published 3 editions of a nutrition textbook. And for those of you who've never written a textbook, don't. It's horribly painful. It's like going to jail. So the 3rd edition of Nutrition and Clinical Practice came out this past fall. 750 pages, 50 chapters, about 10,000 scientific citations. Now, I had help this time around, but even so, it's really quite awful. The book is not awful. The book is good, I think. My mother thinks it's very good. I think it's very good. But writing it was just awful. But it did provide that bird's eye view. It's a view from altitude because those 10,000 citations is an attempt to look without bias at the full expanse of the literature on nutrition affecting a variety of health conditions. And after you've done all that homework, you wind up knowing a thing or two. And you also see a much richer expanse of literature than most people ever bother to look at. And then a lesser exercise, but along a similar vein, I was asked 2 years ago by Annual Review in Public Health to write a paper entitled, "Can we say what diet is best for health?" They said, you know, we'd like you to do this because you don't seem to have a dog in the fight. You're not advocating for a particular diet. You seem to care about the truth, which is the case. And we want you to review the literature, suppress any biases you have, and answer the question. And so I did. And at last check, by the way, that paper was the most downloaded paper ever for Annual Review in Public Health. It had been downloaded over 72,000 times. So I don't know if you're among them, but if not, help yourselves. It's a free PDF. Everybody can have it. And it's a review of the literature. And of course, this isn't just about me. Others have looked at this same issue and weighed in. There are a few good citations here. I particularly like the one in the middle. This was by Frank Hugh, who's a preeminent nutritional epidemiologist at Harvard, and Dr. Hugh just stepped off the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee when they wrapped up their work. So he was on the committee for 2015. And Dr. Hugh and his group were not looking at best diet for overall health. They were looking specifically at diabetes prevention and management. But he and I, and we didn't know about one another's projects, even though they were published around the same time, but we looked at one another's papers and said, bullseye. I mean, we reached exactly the same conclusion. So we came together and wrote a column on the Huffington Post entitled "Knowing What to Eat, Refusing to Swallow It." So I commend that one to you as well. And what I'm about to tell you about the view from altitude about diet and health is not because I have ignored the arguments against it. I've read them all. So, for instance, I imagine everybody has heard that saturated fat is good for us now, except, of course, that it's not. So all of this was a great deal of noise being made about a meta-analysis which almost nobody I've ever met has actually read. I have read it. But more than that, I actually did an NPR interview with, so this is the Chowdhury paper on the slide, I did an NPR interview with the senior author of this paper, Dariush Mozaffarian, who's the Dean of Nutrition at Tufts. And Dr. Mozaffarian agrees this paper did not show that saturated fat is good for us. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but I can tell you, if you read this meta-analysis carefully, what it actually shows is that across a rather narrow range of saturated fat intake in the United States, rates of heart disease were constant and high. What does that really mean? It means when people eat a little more saturated fat and a little less sugar, they have a crummy diet and lots of heart disease. And when they eat a little less saturated fat and a little more sugar, they have an equally crummy diet and equally high rates of heart disease. All this study really showed is that we have invented more than one way to eat badly in the United States. That's all it showed. At no point did anyone described in this study have a diet that was associated with good health. We were looking at prevailing diets in the U.S., and they were all bad. But that's what we've done, right? We cut back a little bit on saturated fat. What did we replace it with? Is everybody suddenly eating kale? No, we're eating Snackwell cookies, right? Low-fat, high-calorie, high-sugar junk food. So we ate a little less fat, a little more sugar. We went sideways. So actually, this study seems to suggest that saturated fat not only isn't beneficial, but seems to be just about as bad as the excesses of sugar in our diet. And then there was a study that came out showing that low carb beats low fat. Lydia Bazzano was the senior author, and we actually wound up doing a radio interview together. And interestingly, when Lydia was describing the intervention, she said, well, in the low carb arm, the thing we emphasized most was vegetables and fruits. Low carb. Well, that's also what they emphasized most in the low fat arm. In other words, the two diets were more alike than different, and so there weren't any big differences in how people did. And there's more to that story, too. But one of the things we ought to consider, and I don't know if anybody listening is inclined to eat low carb, but all plant foods are carbohydrate sources. You can't eat low carb and have that mean anything unless what you mean is I avoid eating plants. Vegetables, fruits, grains, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, all carbohydrate sources. When you want to avoid carbs, you don't eat any plants. You have to be a carnivore. And there really is nothing to suggest that human beings function well as carnivores. Your cat, yes. You, no. Anyway, these studies did not mean what all the hype in the media suggested they mean. And anybody who wants to refute that has to start by reading them carefully. And unfortunately, in this day and age, We don't get a lot of that. What we get is somebody said it somewhere in cyberspace. I read what they said and liked it, so I repeated it, and then somebody cited me, and somebody cited her, and on it goes, and it's an echo chamber, and it's a game of telephone, and nobody's actually read the original paper or knows what they're talking about. Anyway, I'd like to think that I know what I'm talking about, and again, my mother certainly agrees. So I have looked at the literature without bias, not trying to sell anybody a diet, and my job was to answer the question, can we say what diet is best for health? Are there arguments for a low-fat diet? Absolutely, yes. Studies by Ornish et al. Have shown you can cause regression of coronary atherosclerosis with a plant-based low-fat diet. But the issue is, and I did not intend today to get into the history of Ansel Keys and all of that, but the issue is when we first got advice to cut dietary fat, the only way to do that, because SnackWells had not been invented yet, was to actually eat more naturally low-fat foods like vegetables and fruits and whole grains. That was the only way to do it. Well, when you do that, it works beautifully. And actually health outcomes associated with those dietary interventions are excellent. Is there evidence in support of vegan diets, which go one step further and exclude all animal products? Yeah, quite consistently vegan diets practiced well are associated with excellent health outcomes. What about low glycemic diets? Particularly the work from David Ludwig at Harvard, but many others, Jenny Brandmiller in Australia. Absolutely yes, because generally to get a low glycemic diet, you have to avoid added sugar, refined starches. That's a good thing. Interestingly, one paper by McMillan Price et al. Some years ago compared different ways of achieving a low glycemic diet. And so, for example, looked at low-carb, low glycemic, which was lots of animal products, but also looked at high-carb, low glycemic, which was lots of whole grains and beans and lentils. And they looked at a wide array of metabolic markers. And by the way, all of this stuff is cited in the paper that I wrote. And what they found is that the high-carb, low-glycemic diet produced better health effects. So it was still a mostly plant-based diet that won, but it was low-glycemic. What about the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension? I'm actually one of the judges for U.S. News and World Report on that annual best diet routine they do. And DASH tends to win every year. It's a perfectly good diet. I think the reason it wins, though, is because of its name recognition. It was sponsored by the NIH. All the dietitians know it. I don't think it's necessarily the best, but it's perfectly good and has, after its initial use in lowering hypertension, lowering blood pressure, it has been used for weight control and improving overall cardiac risk. Perfectly good diet. How about the diabetes prevention program? $174 million randomized clinical trial, 3,500 pre-diabetics, so on diabetes doorstep, randomly assigned to usual care, drug treatment with metformin, or a lifestyle intervention consisting of a moderate, balanced, pretty easily achieved diet and moderate physical activity. The drug, it's a good drug, metformin or glucophage, prevented incident diabetes 30% of the time. Not bad. But the lifestyle intervention was twice as good. It prevented incident diabetes 58% of the time. So the DPP diet, absolutely, that works too. That's in the mix. How about the paleo diet? Now, from my perspective, a lot of people fly the paleo banner and then eat hamburgers, hot dogs, and pastrami. Folks, there was no Paleolithic pastrami, right? So if you really want to do paleo, we're talking about game, deer, antelope, minimally bison or grass-fed cattle, wild fish, and a wide array of wild plants. That would be paleo. There are very few studies looking at that because very few people are doing it right. But those that do suggest, yeah, that's better than the typical American diet. Might be perfectly fine. It's pretty clear anatomically that Homo sapiens are omnivores. You can choose to be a vegetarian, but anatomically we are omnivorous. So there is place in our diets for animal products if you want them. But you've heard the expression, you are what you eat. What we tend to forget, and what's really important to paleo, is what we eat is what it eats. So if you're going to eat animals, they need to be well fed. And in the Paleolithic era, they were. They were wild animals eating their native wild foods. You really want to approximate that. But there are studies to suggest health benefits from paleo. Low carb, well, it depends. There are some benefits, some harms. But the best work here, like from Dr. David Jenkins at the University of Toronto, is high plant low carb. He actually calls it the Eco-Atkins diet because it shifts from animal foods to soy-based protein. And yes, there are potentially metabolic benefits there as well. How about the Mediterranean diet? Huge literature. And it's a literature I think we can all love because, frankly, this is a part of the world many of us happily go to. spend our hard-earned money to eat the delicious food, right? This is a classic example of an opportunity to love food that loves us back, so that's definitely in the mix. How about the Twinkie diet? Nah, not so much. We'll leave that out. But if you look at every reasonable contender for best diet laurels, what matters here is not what makes each one different from all the others, but what makes them alike. It's the olive in the middle. That's really what we ought to be talking about. And Michael Pollan did when he said, real food, not too much, mostly plants. Frankly, he pretty much nailed it. That's what all of these good diets have in common. And we never talk about that because that doesn't sell fad diet books. We don't talk about that because it doesn't populate the morning shows. But this is the fundamental truth of healthy eating. And yes, it's a little bit vague. But I think that's okay because everybody wants to be the captain of their own ship and the cook in their own kitchen. What we really know from an astonishing fund of evidence spanning populations around the world, every imaginable kind of research methodology, and decades, is that we should eat real food, mostly plants. And that theme allows for variations on the theme. You want to be Mediterranean? Do it. You want to have an Asian-style diet? Do it. You want to be vegan? Fine. You can have whichever variant on the theme you want, but if you want to be healthy, stick to the theme. And much the same is said, and I was delighted to see it, in the recently released 572-page report of the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. I think they did a masterful job. And if you're not already involved in defending everything in this report, I would ask you to get involved because there are important considerations here like sustainability. I mean, this isn't the dietary guidelines for the current generation of Americans and to hell with our kids, right? It's for Americans, which means we don't want to eat our children's food. So sustainability has to figure in here, right? Otherwise, we're talking about food today but not tomorrow. I don't want those guidelines. I've got children. My children may at some point have children. I would like them to be able to eat well too, right? Of course sustainability belongs here. I love this report. I think they got it right, and frankly, there are lines from it that sound an awful lot like Michael Pollan. Question then for us is, are we eating mostly plants? And the answer from my part of the world is, forget about it. 1.5% of Americans reach daily recommendations for both vegetables and fruits. 1.5%. This despite the fact that orange juice qualifies as a fruit, and both French fries and the ketchup poured over them qualify independently as vegetables. It's pitiful. No, we are not eating real food, mostly plants. We're eating this. This is a typical American family and their groceries for a week. It's from a book called Hungry Planet, What the World Eats, and every image in the book is a family in a particular culture and their groceries for a week. You know, if you look really hard, you'll find grapes and tomatoes in the picture, but everything else is in a bag, box, bottle, jar, can, and you get the impression, as I do, that eat food not too much, mostly plants, is advice that goes over here like a lead balloon. Maybe these folks need to hear, if it glows in the dark, step away from the box and nobody will get hurt, and maybe that would help, I don't know. But we've got a big problem, right? So, we return to it then. We know where there is, not just for fingers and feet, but also forks. We are not clueless about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens. The real issue is getting there from here. That's the challenge. And I'd like us to confront that challenge because that's where meaningful progress can be made. And to do that, I switch metaphors mid-talk. I began with the master levers of medical destiny. I now want to talk about a levee. I like the levee metaphor for several reasons. First, what we're up against may be likened to a flood of highly processed, hyper-palatable, energy-dense, nutrient-dilute, glow-in-the-dark, bet-you-can't-eat just one kind of foods. A constant flow of marketing dollars encouraging us and our children to eat the very foods that propel us toward obesity and chronic disease. Wave after wave of technological devices that do all the things muscles used to do at work and at play. A great big obesogenic and morbidogenic flood. And if you want to contain the waters of a flood, keep the ground at your feet dry, you need something like a levee. I like the levee metaphor as well because it keeps me going. You know, I'm invited to do stuff like this all the time, theoretically because I'm some sort of an expert in obesity and chronic disease. But the entire span of my 25-year career, we've had more obesity and chronic disease. That doesn't sound too good. My mother still thinks I'm terrific, but I'm starting to have doubts. And honestly, you know, I mean, anybody who thinks they're expert in this space has to look around and ask, well, what have we actually accomplished? I mean, if the thing we're working on our whole careers just keeps getting worse, it's not good enough. And it does tempt you at times to run up the white flag and say, you know, I should be in a different line of work because we're just losing this war. But the levee metaphor keeps me going, and I think it can do the same for you. Every day, we're either part of the solution or we're abdicating and we're part of the problem. And all we really need to do to be part of the solution is stack a bag of sand. You don't build a levee in one day. You don't build it by yourself, and you don't see the results until the whole thing is built. I believe we will win. I just think the work is still in progress. It keeps me going. The days I feel like giving up, I just say, if I can bend and lift one more sandbag and add it to the levee today, it'll make it a much better day. I'll sleep better tonight, and that's what I do. And the third reason I like the levee metaphor is a precautionary tale. We are a quick fix, active ingredient, silver bullet kind of society, right? I mean, the fact that living well could make us healthy, yeah, but living well, that's actually hard work. Isn't there a magical pill that I could take? Isn't there something I can see on the Dr. Oz show that'll fix it all in one fell swoop? And I know we want this, and I know partly because I've been on my friend's show a number of times, and inevitably after an appearance, get 1,000 emails from people who saw that segment wanting to know, well, is that the thing? And what I routinely tell them when they ask me, that segment I saw on Dr. Oz, is that the thing that'll fix my health? My answer is, if you really want to fix your health, stop watching daytime television. Get up and go for a walk instead. But in any event, our thinking about health is as if we put down one sandbag and thought it would be reasonable to ask, are we dry yet? And the answer, of course, would be no. One sandbag can't do the work of a whole levee, right? I mean, it's a small part of a comprehensive solution. There is no one thing. What we need is a lot of things done right in a lot of places. We need the public health equivalent of the whole levee. And until it's built, the ground at our feet will be wet, and we'll have mud all over our shoes. But I would like to think that together we can live to see that fine day. Wake to the dawn where the waters recede, the ground at our feet is dry, and a world of possibility opens up before us. And for that very reason, I am a sandbagger at this stage in my career. It's what I do. I'm proud of it. I manufacture, test, stack, and as appropriate, attempt to disseminate sandbags. And I aspire to nothing else. And up until now, I've been epidemiological and philosophical and even a bit poetical in this talk. But really, what you will find me doing, if you see me during my typical day, is being pragmatic. Sleeves rolled up, dirt under my fingernails, working on the levee, trying to get stuff done in the real world. So I want to give you some examples quickly of what I mean by sandbags. We've been going into schools for the past 20 years talking about the importance of physical activity, even as phys ed and recess keep getting jettisoned and we keep hearing about No Child Left Behind. And I keep asking, you mean to tell me No Child Left Behind is leaving all the children on their behinds? Is that what it was supposed to do? And usually I get a pat on the head from a school administrator who says, that's really very cute, now we will escort you off the premises. And that's kind of where it would have ended, but for the fact that a solution to all this was inspired by my son. I note in passing that my wife, Catherine, and I have 5 children, 4 daughters and a son. Catherine actually talked us out of retirement to see if I could produce a Y chromosome, which it turns out I can under circumstances I'm not prepared to discuss. But we got the boy, and my son Gabriel, when he was a little guy, was just kinetic in ways his sisters never were. I mean, he bounced off walls. It was perfectly healthy, but if you were cooped up with him for any length of time, you were mightily tempted to medicate either him or yourself. And it was dealing with his rambunctiousness that we developed this solution. Quick activity bursts. It actually began with him running laps around a big auditorium when I was giving a talk. And I'll spare you the anecdote for the sake of time, but this program was born. We got together with experts in physical education and pedagogy and built a comprehensive array of brief structured activity bursts any teacher can dole out to kids in any classroom in the country when the kids are unteachable anyway. During the sit still, keep your hands to yourself, don't throw that, do not pull on that, don't even think about it time, during that time. And because experts in pedagogy were involved, the activity bursts are matched to grade level and subject matter, so you actually can teach during the activity bursts. So the pledge was, we'll give the kids at least 30 minutes of physical activity every day. We won't take a second away from teaching time. You can do it right in the classroom. You need no special training, no special resources, no special spaces. And by the way, you can potentially increase teaching time by 30 minutes a day. And it's free. We're giving it away. Sounds good, right? But as a scientist, you can't fall in love with your ideas. You've got to verify. Trust, but verify. We did. We did a controlled intervention in 1,000 kids. Half got ABC for fitness, half got business as usual. The half that got ABC had significant improvements in key measures of fitness, stable performance on all standardized tests, a dramatic improvement in their behavior. Many fewer kids got in trouble or sent to the principal. A significant reduction in all medication use. A significant reduction in medication use for asthma specifically, which was really a happy surprise. And, oh yes, a 33% reduction in medication use for ADHD. The natural remedy for rambunctiousness in children is recess, damn it, not Ritalin. We take naturally rambunctious kids, send them to schools, bolt them to chairs all day long so they can grow up to become adults we can't get off couches with crowbars, and if they act up about it along the way, we medicate them. It's got to stop. ABC for Fitness is free. It's in thousands of schools. It should be in thousands more. If you work with teachers, pay it forward. All the materials are readily available from my website, from the website of my nonprofit, and you'll see that on the final slide. Help yourselves. Sandbag in the levee. We have a sandbag on the nutrition education side. It's a free food label literacy program called Nutrition Detectives. This is a free DVD available in English and Spanish. It takes 90 minutes out of a whole school year. It teaches kids why they should care about food choice and how to make better ones. Does it work? It works. We did a controlled intervention in 1,200 kids. Half got Nutrition Detectives, half did not. The half that did, significant improvement in their food label literacy, their ability to identify the more nutritious product measured objectively. But that's not all that impressive. We taught the kids and they learned. That's what they're supposed to do in school. And by the way, we're talking about 2nd through 5th grade. 3rd grade is really the sweet spot here. So 8, 9 years old. But you teach kids, they learn something, big deal. Here's the big deal. The parents of the kids who got Nutrition Detectives, we measured pre-post in both groups of parents. The parents of the kids who got the program had a significant improvement in their food label literacy. We never talked to the parents. We just infected their children with knowledge and sent the little vectors home and let them do the rest. So that, the beauty of this is, it's not just about sandbagging, but if we do it right, we can train the trainer, and the trainer can be an 8-year-old, and they can pay it forward. And so we can disseminate the messages out. So that's a sandbag in the levee. We've struggled to reach middle school, tween, teenage kids, and we've developed a music video program for them called Unjunk Yourself. And I think given the venue and time today, I won't show our latest video. I think that's supposed to be on the next slide. But my son Gabriel is our front man. He's a good lyricist. He's a great hip-hop dancer. And the video is called I'm an Animal. So if you Google Unjunk Yourself, I'm an Animal, you'll find it on YouTube. Watch it, share it. And essentially, we're telling kids, we're trying to create righteous indignation. We're telling kids that throughout all of nature, parents teach their offspring how to eat for a lifetime. We teach our offspring that multicolored marshmallows are part of a complete breakfast, right? I mean, it just makes no sense. You watch any nature show, kids learn how to eat like their parents eat for a lifetime. Kid food is the junkiest food ever devised. And I want the kids themselves to be stirred up about that and say, hey, we're being manipulated. I don't want to eat this glow-in-the-dark junk. So my son, who's now 15, is talking directly to his peers and saying, I'm an animal too. I want to achieve my vitality. I want to grow mighty and strong, and I want to eat what I'm supposed to be eating. But it's also a fun music video. So check it out. Pay it forward. Thank you. Ultimately, if we're going to eat well, we have to prepare food well. We have a free recipe site called Cuisinicity. This is the work of my wife, Catherine, who, for one thing, is French, grew up in France and learned cooking from the family, and they're great, and she's great, her aunt in particular. But she's an amazing cook. But she also has a PhD in neuroscience from Princeton University, and when we got to kid number 4, she stopped doing neuroscience and just took care of all of us. But she applied that scientific acumen in the kitchen and systematically started remaking recipes, changing one ingredient at a time. In good science, you change one variable at a time and test it. So, she's got much more than those 10,000 hours in the kitchen. And the idea was to re-engineer recipes from the inside out, make sure they stay delicious, but make them maximally nutritious. Cuisinicity is a beautiful website that features everything my family actually eats, and we're making it available to all of you. So help yourselves. And the beauty of this is our tagline is love the food that loves you back. Talk about having your cake and eating it too. And by the way, this cake, which is every bit as luscious and chocolatey as it looks, is made with minimally sweetened cocoa, and the secret ingredient here, believe it or not, black beluga lentils. And you'd never know it. But what it means is this is extremely filling because there's protein and fiber, extremely nutritious, and yet it's still an indulgent dessert. And you'll find many recipes like that on the Cuisinicity site. So if you cook, check it out. It's a sandbag in the levee. My signature contribution to the levee is a nutrient profiling system. It began with work on an algorithm called the UNCI, the Overall Nutritional Quality Index, and you see the nutrients that feed into that algorithm here. Everybody quickly memorize that. Now there won't be a quiz. I told you about the quiz. It's coming, if you remembered. This system sees daylight as NuVal, nutrient profiling system. And our intent, and when I say our, it was a team of a dozen scientists from the U.S. and Canada, was to build GPS for nutrition so nobody would get lost on their way to trying to eat better. We've studied this extensively and published all the relevant papers, but the most important study wasn't done by me or anybody affiliated with me. It was done at the Harvard School of Public Health. NuVal generates a number between 1 and 100. The higher the number, the more nutritious the food, with all of the relevant nutrients weighted for their health effects. What they did at Harvard was attach NuVal scores to all of the foods consumed by 100,000 people, and then looked across a span of 20 years to see how variations in the average NuVal scores of their foods correlated with health outcomes. What they found is that the higher the average NuVal score of their foods, the lower their rate of heart disease, the lower their rate of diabetes, the lower their body mass index, and the lower their rate of premature death from any cause whatsoever. We can, in fact, improve our diets and our health one well-informed choice at a time. But these are just data, and we've already agreed that data can be bland and anonymous, so meet Sally Galvin. Sally is a wife and mother of 2 boys. She shops in a supermarket in Kansas that has NuVal in it, and the scores go next to all the products in the store. Over 18 months, Sally lost 115 pounds. That rivals bariatric surgery, but the beauty of this is she didn't do anything. She didn't go on a program. She didn't leave her family behind. She just traded up her groceries. One of the many virtues of more nutritious foods is that they fill us up on fewer calories. And for those of you who don't know the work of Michael Moss, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, his book is called Salt, Sugar, Fat, but he also wrote a New York Times Magazine cover story entitled The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. Food is being willfully manipulated by experts to maximize the calories it takes for us to feel full. That's why portion control is so hard. But a system like NuVal enabled Sally to reverse engineer that, eat more wholesome foods, fill up on fewer calories. Her husband lost weight and came off some of his medication. Their 2 boys got healthier as well. Sandbag in the levee, and this sandbag is reaching about 40 million Americans. It's in about 2,000 supermarkets across the country. So we've got a long way to go, but as noted, I sleep a bit better at night because of that. And we've got other sandbags on the assembly line back at home, and I won't belabor that. I mentioned in the beginning we can't just keep waiting on the world to change. You and I are living here now. The people we love are living here now. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, I've got a skill set as a preventive medicine specialist that enables me to get to health in spite of it all, and skill sets can be shared. So my most recent book, Disease Proof, that's what it's about, skill power. Basically says willpower is not enough. There is a skill set. You want to fly a plane, you have to take lessons and learn the skills of a pilot. Pilots aren't better people. They just know stuff we don't know. Well, preventive medicine specialists aren't better people either, but I know how to be healthy. So this is 300 pages of the skills I use every day. How do you eat well when you're traveling? How do you eat well at home? What do you choose in the supermarket? What do you choose at a restaurant? How do you fit physical activity into a crazy routine? And on and on and on. So if you know someone who needs that kind of help, I think it's in the book. We also believe that physicians, healthcare practitioners in general, but physicians specifically need to be a bigger part of the solution. And so we have a sandbag for them. It's an online training program called OUCH, Online Weight Management Counseling for Healthcare Professionals. It's really not just about weight, it's about lifestyle. But OUCH is easier to say than OLCH, so we called it OUCH. And this is a free CME program based on 15 years of behavior modification research we've done at the Prevention Center. And it sees daylight as a free program. There's a URL. Don't write this down because you can get it from my website that I'll show you at the end, which is simpler. Or you can just Google OUCH program. But it's 4 easy modules and 4 hours of Category 1 CME credit. And the idea here is to train physicians to be better at lifestyle medicine. Now, I'm currently president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. That's a very illustrious thing, by the way. If you are president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and you have a token, you can get on a bus. So it's extremely illustrious. And in my role as president of this organization, it's partly my job to help foster more lifestyle counseling in medicine. But I think what we really want is more lifestyle as medicine, and then everybody just taking a whole lot less medicine. That's what I really believe in. So the issue at the end of all this then is, if lifestyle is the best medicine, how do we get it to go down? Lord knows the last thing we need is more spoons full of sugar in modern society, but I think we do need some kind of spoon to get the medicine to go down. I think, in fact, we need a particularly big spoon because it's a particularly big problem. And I would argue that if lifestyle is the medicine, culture is the spoon. And I would derive inspiration from the blue zones. The blue zones are those populations around the world that live the longest and best. They've been characterized by Dan Buettner, who's a National Geographic fellow. He wrote the book, The Blue Zones. He wrote a great piece in, I think it was in Scientific American, the island where people forget to die, but essentially has traveled the world and studied the habits of those populations around the world where people most often make it to 100. But they don't just live to be 100. They're vital, they're happy, and when it's time to check out, they go gentle into that good night. They go to sleep one night and just don't wake up the next day. There's no chronic disease. I mean, they do it right. They really do. And what they do right is culture. So I'm going to end today's discussion with a dream about what I really want to do in my career, what I'd like to do before I'm done, essentially what I'd like to be when I grow up. And I call this dream Glimmer, which stands for a global lifestyle medicine movement to effect reform when I'm feeling reasonable and revolution when I'm feeling radical. But we really want to help light the world's way to health. And this is the landing page for the Glimmer initiative. And the Glimmer vision is that we have this beautiful blue planet. Let's keep it beautiful, but let's make the whole thing a blue zone. Why should only isolated populations around the world derive this enormous benefit from lifestyle as medicine? Avoid chronic disease, live to be 100, go to sleep one night and die peacefully. Why shouldn't the rest of us be in on that action? So we're thinking to advance the agenda of lifestyle in medicine by unifying global organizations to raise the standards of lifestyle medicine counseling for all healthcare practitioners, to change medical education so everyone in training understands the important contributions that lifestyle makes to health, that we can, in fact, nurture nature. There's a lot on this slide, but let's move on. What I'm more interested in is aligning with things like the Blue Zone Project, which is an alliance between Dan Buettner and his work and Healthways, and they're actually working with cities and even states, for example, the state of Iowa, to identify everything about culture that needs to be changed and the environment to make it easier to get there from here. What do we need to do to make Iowa Blue Zone? What do we have to change in schools? What do we have to change in work sites? What do we have to change in the media? What do we have to change in the faith-based community? What do we have to change in shopping malls? What do we have to change in signage? What are all supermarkets? What are all the things that we could do so that eating well and being active become the cultural norm? And that's what they're doing. And Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield is paying the bills. Why? Because they're high, tens of millions of dollars. Why? Because it's less expensive than business as usual. Better to invest in culture change to promote health than keep spending money on bariatric surgery and coronary bypass. So what I am seeking to do with Glimmer is to create a true health coalition, which first and foremost says we can get there from here if we can all rally around where there is. Because since McGinnis and Fege's paper 22 years ago, we have known basically how to prevent 80% of all chronic disease, and we've done altogether too little with it. We need a campaign to start telling people that we know what we know so we can use what we know. And here it is. Remember what I told you? The lumosity part of the program, right? I said I'd show you a house on fire, and I would ask you two questions. Who?
Ford.
Dr. Earl Ford. What?
Whole grains, fruits, and vegetables.
Exactly right. I imagine there were others out there who got this too. So Dr. Earl Ford's study about Potsdam, healthy living is the best revenge, habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, whole grains. Folks, here's the thing. At the end of all this, this is the thing. There is a thing. In 1993, we knew how to account for all the premature deaths in the United States, and we could account for 80% of them with what we did every day with our feet, forks, and fingers. And all we needed to know in Dr. Ford's study about the difference between eating well and not eating well was habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. It was enough. We didn't get into the details of exactly who ate exactly what fatty acid. We didn't debate the specific importance of gluten. We didn't debate the relevant importance of GMO. All of that may matter to you. It's fine. But the simple, fundamental beating heart of sensible nutrition was enough to be associated with an 80% reduction in the lifetime risk of all chronic disease. Why on earth would we spend all our time bickering over what we don't know and fail to use what we do. It's as if firefighters turn their back to a house on fire and say to one another, hey, you know, you've got the wrong caliber hose. You can't possibly put out a fire with that hose. Any nitwit knows you need a hose that's this caliber. Oh, yeah, well, I don't really think so, not to mention the fact that you're using soft water, and everybody in firefighting knows you can only put out a house on fire with hard water, and they debate and they bicker and their backs to the fire. Meanwhile, the house burns to the ground. The house of modern epidemiology has been burning to the ground for decades because we have failed to use what we know. It's time to fix that, because we could achieve a stunning amount of good using the knowledge we already have. We should continue to answer the questions for which we don't have answers. I look forward to the next Nobel Prize in medicine, whoever gets it. But to do that while squandering the unbelievably luminous potential of knowledge that we already have in hand. I mean, talk about neglecting the bird in hand while beating the bushes. If ever there was a classic example, this is it. So, the True Health Coalition is a global gathering, a who's who in public health, disease prevention, lifestyle medicine. And what we're invoking is the Horton Hears a Who principle. Remember that? See, you know, in this day and age, no voice is good enough to rise above the din and the static in our culture. Nobody. There was a time maybe Benjamin Spock was able to do it, but now, you know, we've got cyberspace. Everybody's got a megaphone. Michael Pollan can't do it. Yes, many follow him, but many don't. Certainly Dr. Oz can't do it. The Surgeon General can't do it. But what if, just like in Horton Hears a Who, where all the Who's came together to say the same thing at the same time, what if we did that? Well, we are doing that. The Council of Directors of the True Health Coalition already is home to 150 experts from 20 countries, including, for instance, 2 former U.S. Surgeons General, a former commissioner of the U.S. FDA, chairs of departments of preventive medicine and nutrition all around the country, leaders in the world of cuisine, including Sam Cass, who just stepped down as the White House chef, and on it goes, and all these people are coming together to take a public pledge and say, we may disagree about the details, but we agree about the fundamentals of healthy living. We will stand up and be counted. And actually, the fact that I've got my most illustrious colleagues with me on this panel isn't what impresses me most. Here's what impresses me. It's a team of rivals. I have several of the world's leading proponents of vegan diets on this council. Dean Ornish, Neil Barnard, Cal Esselstyn, T. Colin Campbell, author of the China Study, all on the panel. I also have several of the world's leading proponents of a paleo diet on the same council, saying the same thing, including Lauren Cordain, who's perhaps the best-known advocate of paleo. And what they're saying is what we agree on is more important than the differences. We actually eat more like one another than any of us eats like the typical American. Anyway, I invite you all to join too. You can go to the Glimmer landing page, which I'll show you in just a second, and you can join the True Health Coalition. But the idea here is, you know, people like Dan Buettner and the Blue Zones Project, these are efforts to send a crew in on a ship to fix a place that's broken. But the problem is if you try to fix culture in Iowa, Iowa's still surrounded by the mega culture of the United States, which we hear every day runs on Dunkin'. In America, we run on Dunkin'. We market multicolored marshmallows to children as part of a complete breakfast. It's very hard to change culture when that mighty wind is blowing against you. What we want to do with Glimmer and the True Health Coalition is change the direction of the wind. We want to put wind in their sails and send more ships and more crews to more places that need help, get the job done, and make us a blue zone too. Why shouldn't we be? So again, visit the Glimmer landing page, and please, if you agree with any of this ranting, join us. Be part of the True Health Coalition. Let's use what we know. We don't have to agree about everything to make enormously good use out of the stuff that we have known for literal decades. So here we are at the end. We come again to a fork in the road. For far too long in our culture, health has languished on the road not taken. But of course, what road we choose to take out of the dark wood, it's up to us. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps a better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, but knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. My impression, folks, is that if we are to get out of the dark wood of modern epidemiology, we have to see the forest through the trees. As it turns out, the view of the forest through the trees is best offered by the road less traveled. I'm there, but only in unity do we have the strength to get the job done. So I hope some of you will join me there, because I truly believe it could make all the difference in the world. Thank you very much.
Sure, go ahead. We'll take questions at this time.
How does the New Val program manifest itself in the grocery stores?
It goes on the price tag, essentially. So the manufacturer owns the package, but the grocer owns the shelf. And so you'll notice that there's a lot of iconography right on the packaging, but what grocers do is they'll hang whatever information they want to give you about products on the shelf that they own, and that's where the price sticker goes. So they basically redesign price stickers, so half of it is the price and the barcode and all the usual stuff, and the other half is the double hexagon icon that New Val uses and a number between 1 and 100. And the stores that do it well, and they don't all do it well, I mean, you can design a good system, but you're still dependent on good execution. But I've been in stores that have done it beautifully, and what they often do is they'll have a sign that comes out from the shelf in a row. So let's say you're shopping the cereal row. What the sign will say is New Val scores for this category range from 3 to 96. And then so just as you enter that aisle, you know, wow, that's a big range. So, I mean, if I can get all the way up to 96, I certainly don't want to buy the 3. And it kind of primes you to think that way. And then you walk the aisle, you look for the cereal you like best, see what the score is. If you're happy with it, you buy it. If you're not too happy with the score, you look at others around it and say, well, this is a similar cereal and it scores 20 points higher. Let me give that a try. And then when you get people to do it, there are two beautiful advantages that play out over time. One is with the individual consumer. It's something I call taste bud rehab. Taste buds are adaptable little fellas. When they can't be with the food they think they love, they learn to love the food they're with. And so, a lot of people think they need to eat food that's loaded up with sugar and salt because it's what they're used to. But if you actually buy even closely related products, but more virtuous members of that category, less sugar, less salt, it takes just a couple weeks to get used to them, and then you come to prefer those. So New Val nudges people not only to trade up choices, but to rehabilitate their palates. And then when enough people are trading up their choices, the grocers start to change what they offer on their shelves, and the manufacturers start to reformulate their products. And we've seen all of these trends play out because we've now been in the marketplace for since 2008, so 7 years now, long enough to start making a difference. And we've heard reports about products where there was a really low score and it was reformulated and it took this many tons of salt out of the food supply or this many tons of sugar out of the food supply. So that's how it works.
Is there information on the Glimmer website or the
About New Val specifically? There's actually a New Val website, newval.com. N-U-V-A-L. And I'll note in passing, by the way, that when the scientists and I finished building the algorithm and testing it, I went to the FDA and offered it to them. I met with a delegation from the FDA. This was back in 2006, I believe, maybe early 7. And I said, I'd love for this to just be a tool at the service of public health. And they could not take it. I mean, the scientists that I met with wanted to, but they basically said, given the politics and the bureaucracy, if you give this to us, you may not live long enough for it to see daylight, because it's pretty blunt. I mean, products that score a 1, it's basically saying, it might as well be a skull and crossbones, I guess. I mean, this is junk. Eat it if you want, but it's junk. The government tends to be much cagier, in its advice about that. So we said, we'll just never get it out there. What I recommend you do is form a public-private partnership. Get financial backers who want to make a business out of this. So it is a for-profit company, New Val LLC, because it was the only way to make it happen, but it wasn't what we intended at the start. But that company licenses the system to grocery stores. And again, about 2,000 supermarkets offer the program around the country. And if you go to newval.com, you can find if one of them is anywhere near you and how to get more information about the system. And if it's not in a store where you shop, what you can do to try and get it there.
Thank you.
Dr. Katz, we actually have a phone call from New Jersey.
Phone call from New Jersey.
New Jersey, go ahead with your question.
Okay.
Okay. My question is this. There are certainly some people and organizations out there who are going to be interested in the money side of things. So whether it's a pharmaceutical company that wants to sell its medicine or a food company that wants to sell its marshmallow cereal, how much do you find that's a concern as far as sort of that battle?
Well, there's no question it's a huge factor. Thank you for the question. And, you know, I live in the real world like you do, and I know that money talks. And, yes, I've come up against it. And sometimes it's brutal and blunt and blatant, and sometimes it's incredibly subtle. And, you know, I mean, there's just a veneer of civility, and we're only thinking about the customer, and we only want to keep the customer satisfied, and what's going on behind the scenes is every bit as brutal. But here's the thing. So, you know, I hear that over and over again, and you know, the temptation might be to say, well, you know, who are we in public health to go up against the Krafts and the PepsiCos of the world? We're going to lose. But I actually don't think so. Yes, they're willing to sell junk if the public buys junk. No question. You know, they're not the good guys. But they're not the bad guys either, in the sense that if the public would only buy good stuff, they would shrug their shoulders and say, gang, we've got to make better stuff. How do we know this? We know this from some very compelling natural experiments. So I think back to the height of the Atkins craze, which I never bought into, by the way, but you know, it's an interesting bit of history. We basically got Atkins' book, which, by the way, was a rehash of his original book from 20 years earlier, but then Gary Taubes wrote a New York Times Magazine cover story, What If It's All Been a Big Fat Lie? That was the name of his article. And within literally a span of a couple of weeks, the Atkins diet hit the stratosphere. Tens of millions of people were on that diet. And within not more than 12 weeks, and I think it was actually more like 6, every supermarket in the United States started offering a product line that hadn't existed until then, and that was low-carb products. I don't know where they came from. I mean, they manufactured them literally overnight. There was no policy involved. There was no legislation. There was no litigation. There was just a change in the demand. We tend to talk about the food supply as if it's the Himalayas, you know, as if it's this thing in the landscape nobody can do anything about, it's just out there. It's not true. There is one thing that consistently trumps the supply, and that's the demand. So Glimmer, you know, essentially we're not going up against the big food companies and saying, change what you do, you're bad. We're taking the message directly to the public and saying a who's who in public health. You know, so, I mean, could they silence us? I doubt it. I mean, I think that would be quite nefarious. Maybe they'll try. But a who's who in public health, including people seemingly at opposite ends of the spectrum, vegan and paleo, are saying these are the fundamental important things about healthy eating we all rally around, we all agree on. If you want to feed yourself and your family well, honor these principles when you shop. If we can get enough people doing that, I think the supply will respond to it. I think they'll change. And that was the intent with NuVal, too. If we could put the truth about food on display, and by the way, these same interests have fought NuVal every step of the way. But you know, if we can tell people the truth about food, we're not telling them what to do, we're just telling them what's what. So a lot of my colleagues have careers devoted to changing the supply directly, and I support that. I've chosen, you know, rather than to do karate with these guys, because you're right, they're big and they're strong, and they, you know, there's a tendency to leave blood on the floor, and a lot of it might be mine. I've chosen to do judo with them. What they want to do is sell profitable product and keep the customer satisfied. I'm simply trying to change what it takes to keep the customer satisfied and expect they'll keep up. I think it can be done.
Okay, we have one question that came through by email. I'll read it to you.
Sure.
The study completed on the people in Potsdam, Germany, show that they are more active and have better eating habits. It also needs to be considered the fresh fruits and vegetables there are much cheaper than here. Also, there are more sidewalks and bike trails to encourage exercise. I asked my German husband about this and was told that the state provided supplements for certain types of groceries to keep the cost down for the consumer. Would this not also be a benefit in the United States? Would it not be cheaper to keep the population healthy?
Yeah, you know, there's always a ringer in every crowd, somebody who knows the ins and outs of life in Potsdam, right? I mean, Anyway, thank you. So I've not spent time in Potsdam per se, but what we should note, two things. First, let's remember that the study was comparing people in Potsdam to people in Potsdam, right? It was people who got healthy living right and people who didn't, but they were all in Potsdam, so they all had the same environment. But the basic answer to the question, shouldn't we be doing some of those same things, is hell yeah, absolutely yes. And that's what the Blue Zone Project is all about. It's saying it's too much to ask the individual to swim against the current of our culture and try to get to health. We're not salmon, for crying out loud. What we want to do is change the current of our culture so it leads people to health. Totally agree. On the topic of fruits and vegetables, actually there is a lot of effort there. The USDA is providing subsidies so that in particular people who can least afford them get help. So for example, in the SNAP program, vouchers are accepted at farmers markets. There are actually discounts for fruits and vegetables for people in the food stamp program. But just quickly, we don't have time really, but we are working on a program we call Fingertips, which combines the NuVal system with financial incentives for more nutritious food, which of course would provide incentives for fruits and vegetables, but more nutritious food in general. Why not do that? Look at what goes on right now. So I'm talking to a public health audience. Think about the SNAP program. We send $100 billion in tax money to the feds to underwrite SNAP to help poor people choose poor food to get to poor health, and then spend a ton more money through Medicaid to pay the costs of all that poor health. Everybody loses. The SNAP beneficiary, the taxpayer, and the government. What if instead we incentivized, using an objective system like NuVal, more nutritious food at the point of purchase, helping poor people choose good food to get to good health? It would cost a heck of a lot less than bariatric surgery and coronary bypass. SNAP beneficiaries would save money while getting healthy. The taxpayers' money would be put to much better use, and the government wouldn't run out of money. And if this works in the public sector, why not the private sector? Why not have big insurance companies adopt supermarkets and say, we will pay to put a nutrition guidance system in and to put a financial incentive into your loyalty card program when people trade up? Because here's what happens. You get to market the fact that you offer nutrition guidance and financial rewards. Your market share grows. The shopper gets paid to get healthy. The shopper certainly wins. And if we spend less on this program than we're spending to cover all the treatment of diabetes and heart disease and so on, then our profit margin goes up. Win, win, win. Doesn't have to just be in Potsdam, absolutely. Say goodnight, Gracie. We're done. I think we're done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Katz. We have truly enjoyed hearing your presentation about how the feet and the fork are impacting the fate of our families. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Molly. My pleasure. Bye-bye, everybody.